What would they do? Would they repeal the tax cut for 95% of the American people once again, give it to the wealthiest Americans? Well, ladies and gentlemen, would they do nothing? I hear nothing other than the criticism. I hear nothing affirmative. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't take this job. Barack didn't take this job to do nothing. We took this job to rebuild America. That's what this is about.
And that's good enough for me. That's from the official Vice President of the Morning Joe program, Joe Biden. Here with us now, Chair of the Congressional Oversight Panel and Harvard Law School Professor Elizabeth Warren. Today, the Oversight Panel released a report that explains why taxpayers could stand to lose more than $2 billion as banks that were rescued by TARP funds buy back their stock warrants. First of all, Elizabeth, thank you very much for joining us. What's a stock warrant?
Come on now. A stock warrant is just an agreement that you will be able to buy a stock at a preset price for some period of time in the future, like 10 years. And so what happens is the stock price today may be down here, but if the stock price goes up here, then the company or whoever holds the warrant, in this case the taxpayer, gets to exercise the warrant at this price, sell it at this price, and the profit belongs to the taxpayer. In effect, this is the taxpayer's only opportunity to participate in the upside from having put more than $300 billion into these financial institutions.
Yeah, all right. Well, speaking of the upside, though, some of the banks have paid back some of the TARP money. And my understanding is that as they have paid it back with interest. Is that true, and is that not an upside?
Well, interest is about the time value of the money. The upside is that, look, we spent the money to rescue these banks. And so the banks survived, at least some of them have so far, and are back to profitability. And so the real notion is the taxpayer should also be able to participate in some of that increase in value for the banks. And let me just be frank. That's what Congress said when they lent the money to them to begin with. Not only do you have to pay back the money with interest, you have to give us warrants so that the taxpayer can get a little piece of the action if you really become profitable again.
So what are you saying? Let's take J.P. Morgan. They've paid back the TARP money. They paid it back with interest, correct?
Yes.
Are you saying that they haven't fulfilled their pledge to pay back with regard to the stock warrants?
Well, what they're doing right now is they're negotiating the price on the stock warrants. So literally, as we speak, as you and I are standing here talking, in today, next week, and the week after, they're sitting down with officials from Treasury, and they're trying to decide. J.P. Morgan wants to buy those warrants so that Treasury doesn't exercise them in the future. Now, that's okay if you set the right price for the warrants, because the price, at least in theory, should cover the upside going forward. So what this report is about is that we take the first sets of transactions, that is, how much was paid for the warrants in the first 1%, because that's all that's occurred so far. Yeah. We valued the warrants, and what we discovered is that, at least based on the best valuations that the experts could come up with, Treasury agreed to take only about 66 cents on the dollar for what it is that they took it for those warrants.
All right, who's negotiating for the taxpayer? Who's negotiating for the governor, for the government? Are you one of the negotiators?
No. This is the Treasury Department. My job is to stand on the side and say, listen, we are here, we are watching, we have experts who are doing independent valuations. If you settle too cheap, you're going to have to deal with some very noisy people about it.
Okay. Elizabeth, speaking about too cheap, it's Donnie. Supposedly there's about $127 billion of TARP money that has not been spent. The great oracle from the Midwest, Mr. Buffett, yesterday gave an analogy and said basically the stimulus was like half of Viagra. Pharmaceuticals aside, too little for us? Do we need more?
Well, you know, this is about me personally and not my panel. I have been from the very beginning deeply concerned about any notion that we think we're going to revive this economy by looking only at these large financial institutions. It's really about what's happening household by household. I am very worried about the rise in unemployment, about the fact that we continue to see more and more foreclosures, decline in real estate values, decline in the value of people's retirement funds. So ultimately, as much as we talk about the TARP, whether or not this economy really gets back on solid footing has to do with whether or not the American family can get back on solid footing.
I'll take that as a yes.
Well, you're right to be worried, Elizabeth, but the economy will get back up on its feet. But don't you think part of the problem is we're such an impatient culture? We think it should have happened already when it's going to take another perhaps year, year and a half.
Yeah, it is going to take time. And you know, all we can say is we're out there, we're watching. This is what our oversight panel tries to do. We keep pushing in the right direction, but this is not an overnight process. It's a long, long haul.
You must be having fun in July getting to stay in Washington and talk to Tim Geithner all day. That sounds like a circus.
Yeah. This is an adventure.
I guess. Elizabeth Warren, thanks very much for joining us.